Well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us for our weekend edition of Hebrew Word Study. We are in the book of Matthew, Hebrew book of Matthew, by the way, and we are looking at a very familiar verse and just wonderful that we're coming across this and going through this at this Christmas time. And of course, this verse always helps us bring us into a Christmas frame of mind and thinking of the birth of Jesus. And so I think it's just so fun that we're going through this at this time. So what you see on your screen, again, there's a couple different little areas that overlap one another, but let me make it bigger so that there's no confusion here. But we're looking at Matthew chapter 1, and in our section here, it's verse 28, but in the King James Version of the Bible, be verse 23. Last week, we went through a few things looking at the words of this prophecy that come from Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14. And the last part we want to look at here to finish off this verse is, "And you shall call his name Emmanuel." Something what you will notice here in the Hebrew version, which is what attracted me to this document, is that it does not have um, which being interpreted or being translated means God with us. Every English translation that you will read will have this mentioned as being translated. But this Hebrew version of Matthew does not. And that's what attracted me to it, because as we understand the culture of that day and the language of that time, that um, Jesus spoke Aramaic. Hebrew was the language of the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh, Old Testament, if you will, was in Hebrew, and the people spoke Aramaic. And so seeing this portion here that which being interpreted always kind of stuck out with me. Of course, when you get to the Greek um, translations of the New Testament, well, that would make sense if you had a people who were not um, speaking Hebrew, they didn't speak Aramaic. If Greek was their main language, well, then yes, you would have to translate it, and it makes sense from that point of view. But knowing that Jesus spoke Aramaic, Mary spoke Aramaic, Joseph spoke Aramaic, it was the language of the time, and if the angel was speaking to them in their native language, Aramaic, um, there would be no reason to say what the interpretation would have to be. The angel would not have had to say to Joseph, okay, you're going to call his name Emmanuel. And by the way, because I don't think you know what it means God with us. That was redundant. They wouldn't have to do that. And so this is what at least piques my interest and helps me to feel like maybe this Matthew version that I'm going through um, maybe comes from an earlier source where the that little add-on portion of being interpreted wasn't needed because it was written for those that spoke the language, that spoke Aramaic, that spoke Hebrew, and they would understand it. So that's where this is all coming from, and I think it's quite fascinating. Next thing we want to do is take a look at the comparison here between what's written in this Matthew version in Hebrew versus what is written in Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14. And so, make this a little bit bigger so you can see this. But what you will see here is, let's see, what you will see here in Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14. I lost my page. I need to go back to this again here. Okay, here we go. Sorry about that. What we see is that the spelling of Emmanuel is different. In the Hebrew, you'll see that there are two words here, and I'm kind of circling it with my cursor down at the lower left-hand portion of your screen. And the words are immanu, which is the words that mean with you. Okay. And so it is the word immanu means with you. And then the last part, which are the last two letters of the aleph and the lamed, is El, which is the word for God. So what you'll see in the Hebrew version, Isaiah, is that this is split into two words. Now the translators don't keep it that way. You'll see that they didn't put anything separate underneath, but they combine it together. And that's because the translators obviously uh, thought it, put it as a name. But in the Hebrew, it is not combined into one word. But in the Matthew Hebrew, it is combined into one word. It does have slightly different vowel pointings underneath it. Of course, the ayin has a hirik underneath, which would give it the I sound. And that's why in Hebrew it would be Immanuel. And of course, in English, many different Bibles, you might see it as Emmanuel. Um, that would only come about depending upon a certain dialect of Hebrew, a cultural that might give you more of an E sound for the Hirik rather than an I sound. And again, we have different ways of pronunciation all through English, and every language has that. Depending upon what region you come from, their vowels are pronounced slightly different. And so that's why I believe you see the Immanuel versus Immanuel here in the Hebrew. And so I find that kind of fascinating. Most people don't know that it's two separate words. Um, Also, what's very interesting here is what is ale? This is the word for God, but it is in its unpacking, if you will, it comes from a source that's kind of interesting that it means power. The only reason it's assigned to God here is because God is the ultimate highest power. But in the Bible times, people who were judges, people who were powerful officials, sometimes even kings in other ancient documents are referred to with that same Aleph Lamed Ale sound because of their position, meaning the power. And so here we see in the Targumim, Jastro's lexicon dictionary, it just has it as God or the power. We look at Gesenius in his lexicon, we'll find that there's quite a larger entry in here where we look down and we see everything having to do with this aleph and lamed or ale has to do with the understanding of power. And I'm going to make this just a little bit larger for you so you can see this. And it's a whole entry here talking about that this word is being understood as a strong, a mighty one, a hero. And again, we ascribe that to God, but knowing that the naming came out of ancient cultures, pagan cultures where they had deities who were powerful, and the ancient pagan gods that they served, they also called ale. So that carries over into um, the Hebrew Bible, into the Hebrew language. It carries over into our understanding of God. And when we speak and read the word of capital G-O-D, or here we see it as small g-O-D, we understand that quite clearly in English. Just want to reemphasize that that same type of distinction is made in the Hebrew with the two letters that are known as power, a might, and also as God. So I find that kind of interesting. The other thing I want to point out is that, of course, Aramaic was the language of the day, and so I thought it was only fitting that we take a look at some Aramaic um, portions of the Bible, and this is coming from the Peshitta, which is Aramaic, but in a Syriac alphabet. And so what we see here, looking at your screen, is Matthew chapter 1, verse 23. The characters here that I'm kind of hovering over and the flyouts are coming. These are the Aramaic letters, or Syriac letters, I should say, and it's the Estrangala script. And so essentially, the Aramaic used and written with the Syriac letters is the same alphabet as Hebrew. The spellings are slightly different because Aramaic is a slightly different language than Hebrew itself. But below here, you see the same verses that have the Hebrew square script, um, Ashuri script written out, but the letters are exactly the same. And so it's just to highlight, to show you that here is the word Immanuel, Emmanuel. And so again, slightly different, but it carries over in the Aramaic. Now this Peshitta Bible that we're reading from does have the remainder of the words that you find in the translations from the Greek, which being interpreted. So again, that's very interesting, which makes me understand that these scriptures that we have been through many different hands, through many different centuries and millennial of time. And again, we don't know how this Peshitta was given and whether it was influenced by the Greek. And so they put in, this is our um, interpreted. It really wouldn't need to be there because it's very clear in the Aramaic language. What you will notice, though, is that the word for God in Aramaic is different. It's aloha. And so versus ale in the Hebrew. So that is one major difference, and that plays into a very interesting comparison when we look at the word of the name of God, which is known as the Tetragrammaton, or sometimes called the four letters. In Hebrew, it is thought to be spoken of as Yahweh, even though we're not completely sure. But in the Aramaic, we see that it is Maryah, which is the Aramaic equivalent of the Yahweh. And so again, very interesting here that Eloha is the equivalent of El in Hebrew. But again, a very fascinating study. I'm not sure if everybody's as excited about it as I am, but it does. What excites me is to find some passages that have the understanding that this wasn't needing to be explained as a translation, but it was understood. And to me, it just gives a little bit more, I don't know, support, knowing that as more scholarly studies of passages of scripture come out, and they are finding more and more ancient manuscripts every time the archaeologists dig and discover. We have many more manuscripts at our disposal right now to study from, and to find one here that shows you shall call his name Emmanuel without having to say that it was interpreted into God with us really helps us feel like we're getting closer to the words that were actually spoken by the angel to Mary and Joseph, the words that Jesus actually spoke when he taught in Aramaic, when he ministered in Aramaic. We just get a better understanding of that. So I hope you enjoy that. I hope when you see the word Emmanuel and sing it in the Christmas carols and talk about it, that you'll have just a little bit deeper understanding of what this word means and where it came from, and how it's really a combination of with us God, and to emphasize that our great Creator took on the robe of flesh and came and dwelt with us. And that's the real main story and the most important understanding to come away with. And I believe that studying this the way we do here by looking at the original languages just helps reinforce that. So God bless you. Thanks again for enjoying this study, and may you have a wonderful rest of your week. Bye-bye.